Welcome inside this episode of This Week in Hockey East. I'm Bridgette Proulx here with Eric Gallanty, and it is time for the semifinals. I'm really excited to get into all of these matchups. We have 4 teams left in the Hockey East tournament. We're going to go through them one by one and just kind of let you know who you need to watch, what goaltending's been like, just the basics for every team if you're rooting for them on Thursday at TD Garden, and then maybe Friday if these teams make it to the championship round. But Eric, we wanted to start with Northeastern because this has really been the big story that came out of the quarterfinal round. It was the biggest upset of the matches.
Yeah, absolutely. Northeastern becomes the first 9 seed to ever make the Hockey East Semifinals. What a impressive performance they had for a lot of different places. We could start in their victory over Boston College 3-1 on Saturday night in front of a full house at Conti Forum. But I think the place we have to start is Cameron Whitehead, right? And, you know, he's our night shift all academic standout of the week. It's great. I mean, we talk about turnarounds sometimes, and sometimes we're talking about, you know, okay, since October they've turned around, or since, you know, whatever. Cam Whitehead was, I mean, in his own words, in Northeastern's own words, it was an inconsistent season for the team. It was an inconsistent season for Whitehead. I mean, he was pulled as recently as March 1st in a game against UConn, but he has just been unbelievable in these 2 playoff games. He has a .961 save percentage in these 2 tournament games. It's a .949 save percentage if you go over the last 4. Remember, you know, this is a Northeastern team that gave up 11 goals in 2 games in Beanpot. But I think the thing that really has to stand out is it's not like he hasn't done this before, right? He is an Eberle Award winner as the most outstanding goalie of the Beanpot 2 years ago. Northeastern always seems like they get hot this time of year, whether it's the Beanpot, whether it's the Hockey East tournament. So they do have some of that sort of ingrained DNA, but boy, Whitehead was just stellar. He's been stellar for 2 games now.
Yeah, it started in that Merrimack game. And what stood out to me about him was that he got better as the game went on. You could see him start to gain his footing, and he really needed to be great in overtime because that game went to 2 overtimes and he got peppered in the first overtime. He made 14 stops, and Merrimack really seemed to have Northeastern on their heels. But second overtime comes, he's able to get them there, and he was the better goalie in overtime in that game. And he took that confidence that he gained from the opening round, and he played just as well against BC, the number 1 team in the country, which you were broadcasting that game, Eric, and it just felt like there were certain moments in that game that BC had Northeastern on their heels, and they were, especially that final push that they made, I'm thinking, oh, this is getting tied, and this is going to be another overtime game. But he just held down the fort.
Yeah, he definitely did. And obviously BC's been so strong in the third period, it felt like they were pushing again. They got 1 back, but obviously needed the 2. I think that's the thing with the Boston College game, right? Game 1 for Northeastern, Jerry Keefe, we talked to him this week, and he said, look, no matter what happened, we're 1-0 in the new season. And that's kind of our mindset. But the BC game felt a little bit more personal. And the players even said that. Cam Whitehead said that post-game. Dylan Ritzkovian said that before the game, that they did not like the taste that 8-2 Boston College win left when they lost that game in Beanpot, considering how good Northeastern's been in the Beanpot in years. And they talked about not just a rivalry, but, you know, how personal that one was for them. And it felt like you could see that in how they played because they were so committed to the structure, right? The block shots were crazy. You know, they have 47 block shots in 2 playoff games here in the Hockey East. They had 20 of them against Boston College. So you could really see how committed they were to that structure, to that strategy, and really trying to bounce back from what happened against Boston College last time these 2 teams played. But it's not like they haven't had success against Boston College.
Yeah, exactly. There's that believability that we beat them earlier in the season. They beat them 4-2 in November. Not every team in Hockey East was able to beat BC even once. So they were one of those teams that had done it before, and they'd split those 2 games in November. You talk about the bad taste in their mouth from the Beanpot, which was the most recent matchup. But you take what you learned from the time you were able to beat them, and you apply it. And now with a playoff win, they end up with the season series being tied 2-2. And there's very few teams in the whole country that have been able to do that against Boston College, take 2 wins against them this season. So certainly felt like an important moment for them against really a team that I think most people would have had penciled in to that championship game. I certainly would have had penciled in to make it to TD Garden. But this is why this is such a big upset.
So Northeastern has beaten number 1. Now they'll try to beat the number 2 seed Maine and maybe even get a trip to the NCAA tournament. They're 2 wins away from that. What a job by Northeastern to pull that upset. We'll talk about the Maine side of things and how this matchup shakes up when we come back here on This Week in Hockey East. Welcome back to more This Week in Hockey East. The Maine Black Bears are the highest seed left in this tournament as they are at TD Garden for the second year in a row off a 7-1 victory over UMass Lowell in the quarterfinals up at Alfond Arena. Another packed house at Alfond this weekend for a Maine team that I don't want to say quietly because we know how good they've been, but just have continued to be so solid through this whole season.
Yeah, and I want to start there. What the atmosphere was like at Alfond for this game, for the quarterfinals. It was absolutely packed. We were doing our own broadcast, but when we listened in, you could just hear the roar of the crowd especially once Maine started to turn things on in the second period, third period, and get the goal scoring and get the crowd really into it. But this isn't a crowd that really needs much to enjoy a hockey game. So they end up with a 10th sellout of the season up at Alfond Arena, which leads Hockey East for the second straight season in most sellouts of any Hockey East team. So Alfond is one of those rinks that you kind of just got to go to. And you can be sure that those fans that were at that game, some of them are going to make the trip down to TD Garden. Even though it's the furthest away Hockey East team from Boston, it's a crowd, a fan base that likes to travel, like to make it there. You're going to see a lot of blue in the stands.
Yeah, they were great last year at TD Garden. There's no reason to think they won't be again this year. You know, you go back to those 2 losses, the end of December, the beginning of January, Bentley and Denver back to back. Since that Denver loss, Maine is 10-3-4 since January 3rd. They've only lost 2 games in regulation over that time. But I think the thing that probably stands out from the 7-1 win is the offensive piece. We know how good Alvin Boy has been. We've talked a lot about that this year. But they score 7 goals. So now they've scored 4 goals in 4 of the last 7 games of the season after they did not score more than 3 in the first 12 games of the first half. Now, they were winning a lot of those games, even though they hadn't scored more than 3. But that is something to note, right? It feels like the offense is starting to come along. I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Number 1 is the power play. But then the other piece is just the depth of this team, right? And that's always been a strength and felt like it's been a strength of what Maine could possibly be this year.
Like you mentioned, 7-1 final score, but you look up and down the score sheet and you realize that all 7 goals were scored by different players. And some of them are your usual suspects like Harrison Scott. 13 different guys with a point, 8 players with 2 points. It's spread out throughout the lineup. And, you know, some guys like Ross Mitten and Sully Shuley, those are guys that scored in that game. They contribute in other ways normally, but just when you start to see 7 goals pile on, and it comes from the depth of your lineup, you got to be happy, especially against a UMass Lowell team that is completely one of those lockdown defensive teams that everybody always says they're so frustrating to play against because they don't give you much. To score 7 goals against a team like that is a good confidence booster heading into TD Garden.
Yeah, I think the other thing is, you know, Maine comes to the Garden now for the second time. And, you know, when you go there for the first time in a while, sometimes, you know, the stage, all of that stuff. But Ben Barr was really clear last year that they were not just happy to be at TD Garden and happy to be back in the NCAA tournament, right? They were really disappointed in not winning those games. So this is about completing the journey, right? They're trying to win their first Hockey East title since 2004. We know how good this Maine program was. We know how good a job Ben Barr has done at kind of turning things around here. And this would sort of be the capper on top for this, especially this 4-year senior class. The other piece is, you know, Maine right now would be a number 1 seed if the NCAA tournament started today. Minnesota is right on their heels. Remember, Minnesota does not play and has not played in a little while because they lost to Notre Dame in the Big Ten tournament. Western Michigan is still right on their heels. It's still not even impossible that BU and UConn could jump into the conversation depending on what happens in their game. The one thing that because these games are on Thursday, we can kind of look at it in a vacuum. And if Maine were to lose that game to Northeastern, then they would fall out of that number one seed conversation for the moment. So this game, not just about the Hockey East stakes, but the chances at a number one seed may very well come down to what Maine does in this game against Northeastern. Should be exciting, should be a great crowd between these two fan bases. That will be the nightcap following what should also be a great game between UConn and Boston University. And we will dive into the Terriers and the Huskies on the other side here on This Week in Hockey East.
Welcome back to This Week in Hockey East. It's time to look into our other semifinal matchup. This segment brought to you by Boston Harbor Hotel. So the 4 p.m. game, it's UConn against BU. And we want to start with UConn. Eric, what do we need to know about the Huskies?
I mean, this UConn team, unbeaten their last 8 now after a comeback, going back to their comeback win against UMass Lowell back early in February. They're 13-2-3 since January 1st. I want to start with what Hudson Shandor did. I want to make sure that people understood what he did in that game on Friday against Providence. So UConn's down 1-0 in that game. Hudson Shandor, the captain, is going to go down as one of the best players in UConn's D1 history, gets banged up early in that game and goes down the tunnel and leaves, and we don't see him the rest of the first period. He's on the bench at times during the second period, but he's kind of testing it out during TV timeouts. You can tell he's hurting. He comes on the ice for one shift to try it, helps get a face-off, 8 seconds later scores, and that's his last shift of the game. And that goal tied the game. I mean, just a kind of legendary performance by Hudson Shandor to help out his team when they really needed him to. So he stepped up huge. Joey Muldowney stepped up huge. He's our Service Credit Union scoring leader. He's up to 3rd nationally and 2nd in Hockey East in goals now with 24 after 2 of them in the game on Friday. He also assisted on Shandor's goal. Muldowney has points in 10 straight games. He has 19 points on this 10-game point streak and 51 shots. And, of the guys that we talk about maybe under the radar in this league, I think he's the one that really we should spend more time on because he's been just so good for UConn.
Mike Cavanaugh says that over the course of the last month of the season, he's really feeling it. And I think you could argue that that goes back for a majority of the season as a guy who stepped up into that new role of being more of the guy when it comes to scoring after all of the departures from UConn last season, including their top 2 goal scorers. So he took that role and he ran with it. And when he has the puck, you just know he's got a great release. He's got a creative mindset, skill set, and he's always a threat to score. And he ends up scoring twice in that game, including an empty netter.
And to your point, Muldowney, 5 goals last year. That was it. He has 24 this year. He's plus 28 in points from last year. But then you look at some of the other guys, right? Jake Richard had 3 assists on Friday. He's plus 20 in points. Hudson Shandor's plus 19 in points from last year. Ryan Tattle's plus 18 in points. Tabor Heaslip's taken a big jump. Some pretty serious jumps year over year. That's part of the reason UConn's in the position that they are. And then they've gotten goaltending, right? Tyler Musick, I thought, was really good. This may be one of the best stories in all of Hockey East here as he wins UConn another playoff game.
Yeah, and really, we weren't sure who was going to start this game because both Musick and Callum Tongue, the rookie, have had stretches of the season where they have taken over the net and done well. I think what went into Musick starting was in the quarterfinal round was that he had the better performance against Providence, specifically in that matchup. And he also was somebody that has brought home a trophy for UConn already in the CT Ice. So he had that ability to win a big game. They go with him in net. But we're not sure. Maybe Callum Tongue, who was named to the Hockey East All-Rookie team as the best rookie goalie, could we see him in the postseason still? It certainly could happen, and they have 2 good goalie options.
Yeah, Mike Cavanaugh said, I'm not going to overthink it, right? It's Musick's turn. We've been going back and forth. It's worked, so let's keep doing it. So we'll see what he decides to do on Thursday, but he's got 2 pretty good options. The other thing with BU, and then we'll talk about the Terriers in a minute, is just the UConn power play's been so good. They didn't score against Providence. They didn't need to on Friday, but they had scored in 10 straight games. They have power play goal in 16 of their last 18 games. So is the power play become a factor with two really good power plays between UConn and BU? It'll be interesting to see. So that's kind of the UConn side of it. We'll talk about the BU side of it on the other side right here on This Week in Hockey East. More This Week in Hockey East, this segment brought to you by Boston Children's Hospital. Let's talk about the Terriers. BU is back here in the Hockey East semifinals for the third year in a row, off an overtime win over UMass on Saturday.
Yeah, this was a great game. I was happy to be in the building for this one. And I want to start with how the game finished, which is a goal by Cole Iserman, his 21st goal of the season. He leads BU in that category. He's a freshman, and this is his bread and butter, just finding the hole and hitting his spots every time. He sees that there's some space underneath Michael Robel, and he's able to beat him 5-hole underneath the pads and end this game only about 3 minutes into overtime. So he didn't get a lot of extra hockey, but Cole Iserman just absolutely perfectly placed shot. Not surprising that he's the guy to get this done and send the team into the semifinals.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty impressive, and especially because UMass had some chances. It felt like early in that overtime, and UMass tied the game late-ish in the third period. I think the thing I want to talk about is BU's defense. This turnaround maybe doesn't have the big sweeping record differential from early in the season to later, but you look at what BU's kind of done defensively, and it does kind of coincide with Mike Yegorov starting in goal. They've only allowed 8 goals in their last 5 games. You go back farther than that, since January 25th, that second game against Boston College in the regular season when Yegorov first played, they've only given up 27 goals total, and 11 of those 27 goals came in 2 games. So they've allowed not just 3 or less, but 2 goals or less in 11 of their last 13 games. So they've been really pretty good here defensively. I know that's something that Jay Pandolfo believes they can do with their structure, but it's been impressive to see what they've done recently. I think that's point one. Point two is this is a BU team that's won trophies, right? Last year's BU team, as good as they were, they didn't win Bean Pot. They didn't, but this one, you could even go back to Belfast, right? They won the Bell Pot. They won the Bean Pot this year. They win this overtime game. And I think that experience is going to help them here in this Final Four.
Yeah, and you mentioned Yegorov. He's a guy who has won at TD Garden already. And this is always part of the conversation is, can my goalie, especially a rookie goalie, handle the bright lights of being at an NHL rink? And not only did he handle it well in the Bean Pot, he gets the MVP, and he has probably his best performance that he's ever had in his career up until that point. And he was phenomenal. Didn't seem to be affected by the pressure at all. In fact, he said that this was one of the most fun experiences he's ever had. And so I don't think we have to worry about him under the bright lights of TD Garden. I think he's able to make himself be calm and ready to go for whatever situation. I think that the fact that they had the success at TD Garden already this season gives the Terriers an advantage in that way.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like he has such a great personality, such a great kind of thought process about all this kind of craziness that happened to him as he comes into his college career. The other guy worth mentioning is Quinn Hudson. We talked a little bit about him on our show last week. He had for a moment the national lead in points per game. I know that Aiden Fink just jumped him after his performance for Penn State over the weekend, but Quinn Hudson now 7 points the final weekend of the regular season. He has 20 points in his last 12 games. 14 multi-point games this year. So yes, Cole Hudson, we know, is the rookie of the year and a lot of deserved recognition there. But Quinn Hudson's been so good for BU, kind of maybe even a touch under the radar. I'm really interested to see how the power play has become a factor in this game. Both teams, UConn and BU, are great on their power play. But in the playoffs, as we know, there's not quite as many penalties called. So that's certainly the case. And then these two teams only played 2 times in the regular season, one of which was all the way back October 18th. It was so long ago. The most recent game, though, was just a couple weeks ago in February, and was a great game, which ended in a 2-2 tie with BU winning a shootout.
Yeah, and it's going to be the same goalie matchup as we saw in that game. So maybe a little bit of a taste of how close this game might be based on the fact that they went to a shootout just a few weeks ago.
We will wrap things up with short shifts ahead of what should be an awesome Hockey East semifinal day that's coming up right here on This Week in Hockey East. Time to take some short shifts presented by the Shift Group, helping former athletes and veterans become elite business professionals. Well, we had the Hockey East major award winners announced this week, Bridgette, as we kind of wrap up the Hockey East season.
Yeah, and we'll take you through those right now. And Ryan Leonard being named the Hockey East Player of the Year at most goals in the conference, probably a really solid candidate for Hobie. So we'll be waiting to find that out a few weeks from now, whether or not he's able to take home the top award in the country. But we know he's the Player of the Year for Hockey East. Runner-up was his goaltender, Jacob Fowler, who was the Stop It Goaltender of the Year in Hockey East. So just a nod to him and how well he's been playing. And Cole Hudson, obvious choice for Rookie of the Year in Hockey East. He leads all Hockey East rookies in points per game. And Mike Cavanaugh, the head coach of UConn, getting the Coach of the Year award in Hockey East. Another 20-win season for him, and it's the best regular season for the UConn Huskies since joining D1.
Yep, and we'll see how Mike Cavanaugh's team fares in the Hockey East semifinals coming up. You mentioned Ryan Leonard, 18 shot attempts, 9 shots on goal in that game on Saturday. Jacob Fowler, and the Eagles, we know will be in Manchester, as they will still be the number 1 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. We think there might be 2 Hockey East teams at a minimum in Manchester, just the way the pairwise looks today. We obviously don't know for sure. But Providence and UConn, depending on what happens, right around that sort of the lowest 2 seed, the highest 3 seed potentially. We'll see what happens over the next few days, but there's definitely a possibility. So you could see a couple Hockey East teams. Otherwise, they may be going on the road a little bit to Allentown or parts even farther beyond. So we will see what happens. This is our final show, of course, before the Hockey East Championship weekend. We appreciate you joining us all year long and appreciate the work behind the scenes of the folks that you don't get to see. Elliot Jenner, Allison Willett, and Brian Smith watching us all season and trying to take our time and fit it in the window. And we appreciate the folks at Nesson for having us on board this year. Hope you've enjoyed watching, and we can't wait for this championship weekend, which is coming up right now here on our Nesson family of networks. Thanks so much for watching This Week in Hockey East.